button. Things are happening. Things are moving. I think we're live. We got in the preview mode. Going forward. All right. Welcome everybody to the podcast. My name is Kent Pycat Gruber, and today I'm joined with two of my favorite people in the world. Go ahead.
My name is Qantas, or Nate Ferguson.
And this is Sam Taco Man Strum, wondering what's wrong with Kent's taste in people.
Yes, the magic of my sec, my favorite people. Um, so,
I'm throwing shade at me, not at you, Qantas, just to be perfectly clear.
I mean, I don't think my flavor's that good either. So, I mean, his taste
like
is not the best.
it's okay. I don't need a good taste in people. This weekend was RuCTFE 2019, a relatively popular attack and defense CTF, and I didn't participate. Qantas didn't participate, but Taco Man, participated in the MySec team. And what place did you guys get again?
It was, I think, somewhere around 80 or so, maybe 80, 90.
Nice. How many teams?
And there were like close to 400 teams participating.
Nice.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay.
So not too shabby. Not too shabby. What was the format this year? How if people don't know what RuCTFE, can you kind of like set the stage of like what that attack and defense CTF thing is?
Yeah. So it's attack defense, like you just mentioned, where basically everybody is in one large network via VPN. So there's people in Russia, Europe, America, just all of us on the same network. And everybody has a vulnerable image that's provided by the game providers, where it's basically a server that has 6 different web applications that are just full of different vulnerabilities that would allow you to return flags or denial of service the application by knocking it over and just making it crash.
Gotcha.
So you are looking through the code on your end, trying to find these vulnerabilities, attack other teams with them, and meanwhile patch those applications so that you will not be vulnerable and returning any flags as well.
Gotcha. And then how is it like distributed this year? Like, so what was the actual like things running on services?
It came as an OVA file, which, if you're not familiar, is basically a standard virtualization format that you could load into VirtualBox or VMware. So you load that into your hypervisor of choice, and then it's a Linux image that had several Docker containers on it, at least one per vulnerable app.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, and the Docker containers are there to provide some separation. So in theory, if somebody was to go through and like get a shell from one of the apps, which is not the intention of the competition, you're only supposed to be getting flags, but if they did get a shell, they wouldn't be able to just own all of the other apps simultaneously without also doing a container escape, which is a completely different level.
Gotcha. So it's really app focused then. So basically, as the blue team, you get to like analyze and reverse engineer your apps and like figure out patches if there's any problems in it, and then you want to use those exploits that you find to basically attack other teams. Then.
Correct. And these are like the vulns you're looking for are like theoretical errors in logic. It's not going to be your standard stuff like your directory traversal. It's not going to be a just SQL injection that you could find with SQL map.
Gotcha.
So every year there's people who are downloading like their Kali Linux images and trying to do like the standard red team tools and finding just the typical web app vulns, and it runs for an hour and nothing comes up because that's not the kind of competition it is.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That business logic kind of focus is really interesting. That's like that's pretty cool. It's like unique, unlike some other competitions. Basically, that's really cool.
Yeah, a good text editor and a little bit of Python or your other scripting language of choice will take you a lot further in this game than like the rest of the Kali Linux tools.
Gotcha. So what was like an example of one of the apps that you had to have, defend?
You mean like the vulnerable apps they provided?
Yeah, like what was an example of one that you kind of digged into?
Let's see. So there was one called Patrol, and for clarification, I didn't actually look at the web UIs of any of these apps. I just dove straight into the code and started looking for issues, because there were a lot of people last year where they would look at the web app and they would just like try to decode what was there from the user interface, and that didn't really seem to do much of anything from what I saw. So I just ignored that aspect entirely, and I didn't see anybody else looking either.
Got it. New approach.
Yep. So the Patrol app that I looked at was basically a JSON API, and you would get a list of request IDs for it, which would map out to a series of graphs. And specifically by graph, I don't mean like a chart, but more like an actual list of edges and nodes with different weights between them. And so you would request these things, and you would have to do a little bit of processing on them and then pass it back up. And if you passed back what it was looking for 7 times in a row, it would return the flag from that server.
Weird.
Yeah. So that's the first aspect of it, was you would find the flag.
Right.
But then several hours into the game, our instance of Patrol started going down while other apps weren't. And we looked at the scoreboard, and almost everybody's instance of Patrol was just going down left and right. So we knew there was something going on that was inherent in the system itself. And if we looked at the logs of what Patrol was doing, it was getting an array out of bounds exception.
Got you. So someone found an exploit.
Yeah. And it was a very basic thing, was it would loop through the user input with a for each loop. So it would make sure every single node was processed. But it would then use that as an index into the internal data structure to look up some information with comparing.
Yeah.
So the upshot of that being, if you had the internal structure was 10 items long and you spent something that was 1,000 items long, it would go right past that 10 items, run out of space, and then the program wouldn't know what to do and it would just crash.
Nice.
I like that.
Yeah. Yep. So we did a patch for that, but that's an example where even if you've already found the flag in an app and you're just like scripting it and repeatedly exploiting everybody else,
Right.
there's still more work to do, because if you can get the flag and then crash it, every minute of downtime is costing them points on that app, and nobody else is getting flags on an app that's crashed either.
Oh, so there's uptime for these services is like basically what one of the kind of bread and butter is outside of just the flags.
Yep, the flags is one category of points, but then every minute the scoreboard checks all of your apps that make sure they're up, because otherwise you could just take all of your apps down and nobody could get flags anyway. But uptime has to be consistent.
Got you.
And that's actually, you can see it as a percentage. Like the top teams, like you'd see some of their apps were in 90% plus uptime, whereas there were a lot of teams, including ours, really, that had less than 50% uptime. And some of that was internal infrastructure issues, and others of that were just denial of service bugs where people were crashing things.
Gotcha. So what kind of infrastructure do you need for these kinds of competitions? Like, so we're basically providing your own infrastructure to run the stuff on?
Yeah, so how you set it up is up to you. We did things on premise. I think MySec has done things on premise every time. Shout out to Brad McMahon at Nullspace and Gil Esparza at GMexican14.
Love him.
Yep. Great guys. They spent like 2 days before the event just holed up at the Uber Ether office, who was our sponsor this year and my employer. And they were just manually configuring the network. So they had the router getting set up and making sure that the Wi-Fi had a safe network for people being natted off from game traffic. Because that's one of the other rules too, is if you find a machine that's on the network, like even if it's just somebody's personal laptop or their kid's iPad that they plugged in for just Wi-Fi access for the day, it is legal to attack it, yes.
Oh my God.
That's beautiful. I like that.
Great. That's awesome, though.
I have heard at least one story of somebody who brought their kid and they let their iPad just go on the network and do whatever they wanted. And somebody just popped it because they found it wasn't completely updated, and look at what I did.
So there's definitely an element of risk involved with these things. You're going to be reformatting.
So that depends on your level of paranoia.
I see.
Yeah, so to loop that in with the infrastructure question, they were setting up the network. So we had the game network that was publicly accessible. It had the vulnerable image on it. And it had I believe they provide a router image as well to like make sure that the VPN is configured correctly.
Okay.
So you need those at a minimum. And of course, you're going to need everybody to have network access from there. But we had a safe Wi-Fi network that was natted off from everything. So like no matter what crazy stuff you had listening on your machine, there was no port forwarding, so people couldn't just reach through and attack your system.
That's good.
That's nice.
Yeah. So that's like kind of the minimum of what you're looking at there. But you could go further if you wanted to. So, for instance, there's been talk of setting up a web application firewall or some centralized logging so that you could have people monitor things without being SSH directly into the game image.
Gotcha. So,
Yeah.
are most of these services are just kind of like plain text, or are they using TLS? How's that set up?
It's a good question. I believe it's all plain text, just because, setting up the certificates and making sure that it's all like either handling the self-signed stuff or getting a certificate authority.
Gotcha. So there's definitely an advantage
on that though, because like for the stuff that I was doing, like it really didn't matter. There was no like snipping things over the wire that I saw.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But there's definitely an advantage of like setting up like the infrastructure ahead of time and having all of those things, ready to go for the competition. Then so that's really interesting. Like different like kind of setup that's required just to play this competition's really kind of cool.
Yeah, and it definitely gives you more like incentive to experiment more on the operation side.
Yeah.
The downside to it being like there was talk last year after that RuCTFE that we were going to try to find a CTF of some format to play once a month. And so when you're asking somebody to spend hours and hours configuring the network from scratch again because we only have temporary access to the space, that's just a lot to ask of people.
Yeah.
True.
So what we've been discussing is actually doing more of a cloud provision kind of setup where we could just spin up all the infrastructure virtually, pay for it for the course of a day, and then just spin it back down at the end of it and just put it up and down as needed.
Yeah, I mean 9 hours shouldn't cost too much, even if you have like a couple VMs, like up to 12 VMs, you're still not going to be paying that much at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
All that built in. That's cool.
Now, RuCTF on when I was looking it up, it looked like it was like a Russian organization that was, or
yes,
some type of...
it's posted out of there, which
Okay.
means that the organizers are working on Russian time. So the game itself actually started at 5 a.m. with everything going on. Yes. So as preparation for the entire week beforehand, what I did was I moved my bedtime back about 25 to 30 minutes every single day to get it more in line with that. And so the Friday evening, I went to sleep at 7:30, and I woke up at 3:30 and just basically like grabbed a bite to eat and drove straight over to the game site and started getting ready.
Wow. Now, see, that's something that's very interesting, is some people just say, forget it, I'm just gonna, wing it off of a couple hours of sleep. How do you feel about that? Do you need to get a good night's sleep in order to feel like you're gonna do well and prosper, or is that something that doesn't really matter to you?
I mean, you're getting into like what people say they can do at that point versus scientific studies of it. Like, there's people who will tell you that they can go on 5 hours of sleep and work at 100% efficiency, and like nobody's been really able to prove that out scientifically that you can really do that for any length of time. Like you can maybe do it like if you got a good night's sleep the day before and you're just cranking on enough caffeine. But I think by the end of a 9-hour competition like this, you're probably going to start crashing and not working at your full efficiency.
Yeah, I definitely need my full 8 hours. Otherwise, like especially for like CTF competitions, like it's mentally grueling. So
yeah,
like, not doing that.
This is like a full day of work plus an hour if you're working a standard 8-hour day. And it's not like you're just, taking a few minutes out to read Reddit or whatever else, and it doesn't matter because, like, that's not the project you're on. But, like, no, every minute that something's down, you're losing points. Every minute that you don't have an exploit working, like, that's potential that you're losing out on.
Yeah, 9 hours.
So you really want to be making the most of every minute of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's just as we're, as my university as a club, we're getting ready to go like CCDC and ISTS. We were planning out like dates and times of when to go and whether or not we should just take the hour haul out to CCDC the night before and stay the night and get a good night's rest, or just go there and just kind of rush things in the morning before the competition. And that's just
Yeah, I
something that
mean,
I'm like, kind of like you, where I want to make sure I get a good night's rest, have that full potential, and make sure I get more than just 3 hours of sleep, you know?
yeah, and that's a huge part of why we want to put all of this stuff in the cloud too, is because it's not only grueling on just the schedule constraints of like every night that somebody's setting up the network is time they're not spending living the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But like if you're debugging last minute issues and you're up until 11 o'clock for a game that starts at 5, and then you wake up at 3 o'clock to like start downloading the image and making sure it's configured the rest of the way, like I mean, they were still able to play, but there was definitely some frustration going on there that I don't think would have been as deep if like everybody was fully rested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that whole cloud aspect that you guys were talking about. I know we touched base about it a little bit, and kind of read your blog post, but if you touch base on all that.
Yeah. So there's nothing restricting you to having to do all this on-premise stuff. And in fact, the RuCTFE organizers had an option this year where you could choose to just host the image directly in a cloud environment they provided.
That's sweet.
Yeah. Now, the reason we didn't want to do that is because that inherently limits you. Because if you're not in control of your own networking aspects of that, you can't choose to put in these additional toolings like the web application firewall or any kind of centralized logging like that. Like it's just the image is there and you have to work with it that way. And we wanted to go further and really use some of the ops knowledge on the team to give ourselves more insight into what's going on. Like if a flag goes out, maybe we could automatically see what request went in that did that and reverse engineer the exploit from that. But what we could do is go in with, say, AWS, GCP, maybe Azure. We've discussed all three in at least passing detail.
Yeah, I've heard.
And just define the infrastructure once. And there's different tools to do that. So you can use something like HashiCorp's Terraform to define the entire infrastructure. You can use Packer to basically define what the machine images would look like individually.
Now you're starting to sound like Kent.
Well, I mean, it does help that we have somebody who works at HashiCorp involved with this whole effort, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But, that was the thing, though. Like, I was talking with Kent before RuCTFE even happened this year about Terraform and how it could apply to some of the open source projects I'm working on. So I'm in the middle of the game this year, and I'm just like, mind starts lighting up how we could apply that to our CTF games as well and really build that up. So to get a little bit back on track with that, if we can define all of that infrastructure once in a couple of files, and then just every time we have a game day like this, just, run those commands and spin it all up at a single push of a button, then not only does that make it a lot easier to run RuCTFE every year, but if we see another attack defense that we all want to try out, then it's a lot less prep work to do it that way than it is to ask somebody to spend 3 days of their life getting that working again.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some serious advantage too of like being able to practice before the RuCTFE event, be able to use that same infrastructure to spin up another team, and then be able to have those teams attack each other, or have a bunch of teams depending on how many people we have registered from MySec. For a growing community, for sure.
And it really doesn't break the bank either, especially for us at EMU. It doesn't break the bank at all when we run a few nights and spin all the VMs up. It only maybe costs us a few bucks.
Yeah, it's like $1 and change, really.
Yeah, that at most.
Yeah, and once you start getting that kind of structure built up, then you can go a couple steps too. And like, there's a lot of universities out there that have no security exposure really as part of the curriculum. So if you could go do something like organize it where you just have 2 opposing teams at the same school, like that's an opportunity that they would not have otherwise.
Definitely.
Yeah.
especially providing the infrastructure for them and just being like, here you go, SSH in or RDP in.
And you're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the scoreboard IP address. Your services are already down. Red team's really naughty this year. Whatever we got.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is too, like we still have the previous RuCTFE vulnerable images,
Oh,
and there's nothing stopping you from just like setting up your own scoreboard app.
Yep.
We don't know exactly how the scoreboard worked, like how it was doing the checks, because if you had a app that was up, but it like all the functionality wasn't working, then it would still mark it as degraded, which was only partial points.
Right. Yeah.
But like at that point, you can run like a mock simulation of past RuCTFEs, so you wouldn't even need to create your own vulnerable images. You could just do it as like an introduction for people before the next game starts.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't have the scoreboard, if you just do manual checks and be like, hey, your service is just down entirely, go bring it back up.
Now, how often did you guys practice for RuCTFE?
So that's the issue, is we only have the one. So we...
The day of.
Yeah, it's the day of.
Okay.
That is prod.
Yeah, so we had discussed that we were going to do more CTFs to practice last year.
Mhm.
And then what we actually wound up playing was there was a Leap Security CTF, but it wasn't attack defense, but it also wasn't Jeopardy style where you just have a list of different categories. They had like a vulnerable Python script, for instance, where you would simulate doing a hackback on it and like trick it into returning back its source code and then this other stuff.
Mhm.
But it was like 5 challenges long. It lasted a day, and I think 3 of us showed up for that one.
Gotcha.
The other CTFs that we did, there was the Trace Labs one, which was a OSINT-based CTF. And Trace Labs is actually really cool because what they'll do is they'll get a list of missing persons from like actual authorities that want the help. And they will have people practice their open source intelligence skills, which is like trying to find information on social media, trying to find information via Google, or like diving into data things.
Mm-hmm.
And people will try to find information like, oh, like the last time they were on Instagram was on this day, and you can kind of see in the background that they were clearly in this city based on the landmark that was in there. And you would tally up all of that information, and it would get converted into points by the organizers. And at the end of it, they would just like send that data to law enforcement and hopefully like get a better lead on where these people had gone.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So we did, I think there was just me and Noise from my sec that did that one. And we worked it fully remote. But the thing about all of these is they're not in the same attack defense format. Like they're very worthy things, and it was great experiences, but it didn't really help prepare for the next RuCTFE in the same way.
Yeah. So I've never played in RuCTFE, but I played in other attack and defense competitions like CCDC and ISTS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like those things are like kind of like their own animal. Totally different from like normal CTF styles where you just have like, maybe it's reverse engineering or the OSINT, style. Like for sure, like being able to keep service uptime while also having to like, deal with like people that are attacking you is like really crazy.
Oh yeah. And there's a lot more stress involved there too, because
Team dynamics.
yeah, like empathetic communication becomes a much bigger deal during an event like this, because
Definitely.
there are going to be the people who are considered responsible for the infrastructure, and they might not consider themselves responsible at that moment for whatever's down, but people just start assuming that they were.
Yeah.
So that person's doing something else entirely, and when suddenly there's like 4 people over their shoulder, like, hey, why isn't this working right now? And it happened to a couple different people.
Mm.
And I even joked about it to people a couple times, like, that half joking kind of thing where you're really wanting them to stop, like, hey, like, let's have more people look over his shoulder. That's really helpful right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pressure is so real, and people just like like your friends even like it crumbles, like all the friendships just break, everyone's upset because everything's just on fire. It's really crazy. Like when team dynamics are especially just thrown together last minute, it's really hard to make that work. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. And everybody's going there to flex their technical skills and, freaking out a little bit. But Like that's one of the biggest things you can do going into these is just remember, like, if the service is down for another 2 minutes, it's not a big deal. Try to establish a communications channel that doesn't involve like constantly bombarding the same person.
Yeah.
So like that's one thing I wish we had done was create like an explicit operations channel for people to say like, oh, this part of the infrastructure is down.
I almost feel like you almost need like a ticketing system. Like you really almost need like a Jira or something like that to like manage like the amount of chaos that's happening.
There was discussion of a Trello board and that kind of thing.
I think that would be smart, very smart to have something like that versus somebody, getting up off their desk and going and hovering over the shoulders like, hey, why isn't this working? Hey, 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 where
Yeah.
you can just submit something. Or, I mean, even Slack would be. Did you guys use Slack at all?
So we were on Discord for that one.
Discord, okay.
Yeah, and the reason for that is Slack on my side is public access, so anybody could join on any random day. And last year, literally, we had somebody log into the CTF channel with some Russian call sign. And it ended out he wasn't there. Like he had an actual like legit story for it that people were able to vet later. But everybody, but like I said, later they vetted it. But in the meanwhile, the entire room freaked out and like we banned their account for a couple hours.
That's great.
Yeah, so we now have a closed Discord where invites are only available like before the game begins.
Probably smart.
Yeah, so this year I actually had it set up so we had one channel per vulnerable app. So if you had findings about that, you would dump all of your information in there, and then somebody who wanted to come in like an hour later and figure out what the idea with it was, or if you were talking live, you'd have one place to do it, and so nobody could be out of the loop with that kind of communication.
Yeah.
No,
but we didn't have that for like monitoring uptime or operations. So if somebody had something that was down, they'd just go to Brad and be like, hey, the server's down.
No, ping Brad.
Yeah, like if we'd had a channel for it and we could have like people would go in and check, be like, oh, somebody already said that, like he knows, that would have helped.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to coordinate. Like you almost need a specific like team coordinator to just handle that kind of communication, like a manager, and then have the employees. Like you have to like almost really simulate it like a business environment in some cases to make it run smoothly.
No, exactly.
And that was kind of brought up, but like
that's rough.
So there's two problems with that. One is that nobody wants to show up to this CTF and play strictly people person. Like I bounced into that role for a little while and then I bounced back out of it, but like doing it all day just doesn't function.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like people, they're going to bypass it. Like the coordinator is going to be busy with something. Somebody will look over and be like, oh, okay, I'll just walk straight over to the other person.
Hopefully you can iron those things out in practice. That's when practice becomes like really, really important to be able to see if the strategy you come up with even works and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think the Discord worked really well in terms of the app part of it. So I really want to try to push more of that where it's like we have central channels for things, but we don't have to go through a central gatekeeper for it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
And, maybe more flaws will become apparent in that strategy at some point, but I think it's too early to really re-steer the ship on that idea before throwing it out.
Yeah, and that's like the benefit of, obviously being in the school is, we have people that want to go into that managerial leadership type of position. So like when we trained for competitions, like as of right now, we went through and listed all the rules for people and individuals, and nobody really wanted to be in that position because I remember Emily was last year was really kind of hands off keyboard and more focused on like injects and just making sure everything was pretty much running smoothly like a manager would, and I said I would take down that position. But it kind of, like you said, it's like nobody really wants to come to, a CTF or any type of competition and be completely hands-off keyboard and be that purple people person. But sometimes it's got to be done to win, Well,
if you're going to do it, what I would suggest is that you have a schedule that's chiseled in stone ahead of time.
Yeah, no, for
when
sure.
people are going to do it. I guess maybe not chisel in stone, because if somebody's really hot on their current analysis and they're like just about to put together a bone, you don't want to tell them like, well, you're 15 minutes away from like creating a whole new class of flags we're capturing, but it's time for you to go like coordinate everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like have one person do it for 2 hours and then let them go back to have their fun, have the next person rotate on.
Yeah. I like that idea.
Yeah. That said, it's not really a role that I want to be slotted into because I don't want to be angry at people and then try to analyze stuff like for 3 hours after that.
Yeah.
And I'm not about to ask that other people fulfill a role that I'm not willing to go into myself.
Yeah.
That's fair.
That is. It's almost interesting after a competition when you're with your competition peers and you're like, you know, like you said, Kent, relationships and friendships start to crumble in the middle of the competition and people get heated and hot and upset.
Well, afterwards, it's like everybody's fine and let's all go get beers or whatever. Maybe not if you're in the collegiate setting, but
Yeah.
it's just, you know, if I've had to act as coordinator for 3 hours, it takes a while to shift back into a purely technical mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that whole reason why, well, it's half the reason why a 1 hour meeting winds up costing 2 hours of productivity.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I was in people mode. Now I've got to like reload the state of everything in my brain.
Like a
My
computer.
brain's real slow.
256 megabytes of RAM.
That's fast compared to what I'm working with right now.
I think you're talking about capacity versus like memory bandwidth
No idea.
or latency.
No idea.
Yeah, I'm still running sleep deficit from this whole event. So
So moving towards the cloud, using the Terraform and the Packer,
Kent.
I really like those ideas. Yeah, and I've been kind of exploring those kinds of things in a repository that I created a few months ago. For specifically, I was focused on ISTS and CCDC, kind of like practice infrastructure for EMUSec, and currently like working on like the scoreboard aspect of it and kind of like cleaning it up.
Yeah.
And I've been like posting about it in my sec in the programming channel, and I've been having a lot of fun learning Svelte recently. And I just wanted to just kind of shout out Svelte as being like one of the coolest frameworks that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And just kind of you should check out Svelte. It's like the different kind of framework that I've always wanted. It reminds me a lot of jQuery in terms of like writing less and doing more.
Yep.
A lot of fun. And I think that would be something we could definitely use in my sec too, just kind of like pivot that code towards, you know, the RuCTFE use case.
Yeah,
Svelte is very nice, especially compared to when we went around last night. Compared to Vue.js, for what we were trying to do, you know, it Svelte works a lot better. And like you said, it you can do a lot more with like barely any code. And it gives you really good documentation.
Question.
Yes.
So with Svelte, is it like say React or whatever the other one was that came after, where
Vue?
you're expected? Yeah, I think it's Vue. Like I said, very low sleep. But is it like those where you're expected to configure some ungodly Webpack config to like get an optimal workflow?
Yeah, so the way that Svelte works right now, you use something called Rollup, which is made by the same person, Rich Harris. He works at the New York Times, and he's been building out Svelte for a couple of years now. And he also made a Webpack alternative. There's another one, but he has Rollup, and it's a really, really simple command, and you just use npm to basically wrap those commands. So the only commands that I ever have to run are like npm build or build something, and then npm run. So it's all just npm commands. It's really, really simple, straightforward. There are no runtime kind of dependency or like there's only development dependencies. So there's no like other things that you're there's a compiler, and it really like helps you. There's even like really cool linting built in, like right out of the gate. That was just like super helpful for accessibility.
Oh, that's good.
So there's a lot of really cool things with Svelte. It's really minimalist. Like it has like the cleanest API documentation I've ever like had like the pleasure to read through.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
So
Well, the whole
Look forward to
Webpack thing was what got me when I was trying to set up a new React app for a gig that I was at previously. And it was one of those shops where like there was always some time pressure going on to kind of get tasks done quickly. And so I'm just looking through all this stuff with Webpack and like, oh yeah, like to really get React to work properly, you should be manually configuring this Byzantine JavaScript build system that sometimes minifies things unless you want to have proper like line numbers in your debugging, in which case you need this other flag. I'm like, why don't you just pre-configure this?
Speaking of debugging, Svelte has this really beautiful like breakpoint debugger built in where you just literally like do an @debug and then like the name of the variable you're looking to debug like within like the JavaScript console. It's beautiful.
Ooh.
Like super I was super like taken back when I like just tried it out and I was like, that's super powerful. I could use that like all over. I've been using it quite a bit. Having a lot of fun with it, honestly. It's a really good system. It minifies your JavaScript for you, bundles it all up, and it's super fast. Like, and like all of the reactivity that I've had even like some trouble with in Vue. Where Vue, it's a good framework. I've used it before for other projects. I've used React before. I've used Preact. I have used a couple front-end frameworks. I've built a front-end framework too. And like the way that Svelte does its reactivity is actually reactive, unlike React, oddly enough. And like the way that it does its forward referencing is very similar to, and Rich Harris has a talk on it, but it's very similar to like spreadsheet forward referencing. And it has just like this beautiful system under the hood that is honestly even like pretty readable if you want to like look at like the thing that it bundles for you. And it has like even like server side rendering is an option that you can build out instead of the like application dynamically doing it. The server side can render most of it, so it's like SEO friendly. Super cool project. Very much having fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to trying it out at some point because that's the other thing I don't like about a lot of the modern frameworks is just how bloated they are for simple things.
Yeah, and I hope I can get you guys like working on it too. Like hopefully Svelte's a simple enough choice that it can be something that you guys can pick up, or at least faster than other frameworks.
We'll see. I don't think I could add another side project onto my list until one of them can like take a year off at this point.
That's totally fair. We'll definitely want to get Nate on it.
Yeah, I'm at that point where if I promise anybody anything additional, like I'm just going to be overextended and not deliver correctly on any of the things and disappoint everyone simultaneously.
We're definitely going to get the Terraform stuff all scheduled out in 2020.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah. I'm the same way right now. I have my hand in everything. But I like it. I like staying busy, and being able to dabble and everything. Like I'll hop on with Kent and we'll have like a little coding sesh. And which, by the way, shout out to Visual Studio and their live share, the best thing they could ever made. It's amazing, lifesaver. But I'll just hop on and just kind of do that at the same time doing homework, help with motivational, be the cheerleader. Because I'm not a professional coder by any means. I'm not on the same level as Kent, but I try to contribute as much as possible.
I'm picturing you with pom-poms and a mini skirt now, and it's not a good vision.
It's beautiful. What do you mean? Just like all the it's like a gorilla in a.
Oh, it's very beautiful. It's just not good.
Oh no. Well, I think that's a good place to end the podcast. With that,
good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll definitely have another one. Again, thank you so much, Qantas, Taco Man. It was really great to talk to you guys, especially about this RuCTFE thing. I really love attacking
me on, dude.
And especially looking forward to the infrastructure as code bit that we're going to create to kind of answer some of the problems that were kind of that unfolded. It was cool.
Yes,
yeah,
for sure.
Hopefully we'll be able to talk more about it as the project continues and kind of let people know what's up.
Definitely. We'll put it on GitHub. We might open source it, depending. It's hard because maybe you don't want to open source the thing that could help other teams, but
Yeah. Normally I
Hmm.
like teaching people, but this is a little more competitive.
This is cyber war. It's different.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Have a great night.
Alrighty,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good night.